Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to join you and your audience. It's a pleasure to be to see you again and to speak to everyone. So I was born and raised in Israel, as it's probably clear from my accent. But my family came to Israel in the early 50s from Iraq and from Tunisia. We all know that the Jewish diaspora um, was all over the world, like from Iraq to Tunisia, through Ethiopia to Europe to America to everywhere around the world. Jews were in the diaspora, and my family are part of, as you said, the Mizrahi Jewish community, the Jews of the Middle East and North Africa, also in diaspora. I know it's important to remember that we're in. Although some people I'm seeing the conversation today being sent like around Mizrahim in the conversation is, as if they were in the Middle East, so they haven't left Israel, but they have also left Israel. Although the proximity is much closer to Israel than other places, they were still in diaspora. And the term Mizrahi is a term that is a diasporic identity that they had. But my family, in Iraq and in North Africa, in Tunisia, they were living as dhimmis. Dhimmis and a protected minority. It's basically a term that all minorities in the Middle East received that were not Muslim or not Arabs. And to be a dhimmi meant that you were, second-class citizen. And my family in Tunisia actually were oppressed for decades. They always knew that they were not equal citizens. But also in the Holocaust, this is something that is not often talked about, but the Jews of North Africa, and specifically in Tunisia, were under the Nazi Vichy regime. My family had to work in a forced labor camp. About 5,000 Jews, I think 3,000 Jews were sent to death camps in Europe, and a few hundreds were also killed there. But this is I think it's an important part of the conversation, because the Holocaust didn't just happen in Europe. It had the ideas of the Nazis were to take over the Jews all over the world and kill all of them. And we were lucky enough to survive. My family, after the war was over, and in 1945 or 46, I think, Tunisia received independence from the French regime and the French colonialism. And when they thought that the Holocaust was over and things will get better now, quickly they were reminded that nothing will change. That the new Tunisian government actually oppressed them even harder with incitement and anti-Semitism in the media in Tunisia, taking over and destroying the Jewish quarter in Tunis, really facing oppression that was just yet again a reminder for them that the only place that they can live in freely is in Israel. And the same thing happened to my family from my mother's side in Iraq. They also knew that their status is as dhimmis, as a second-class citizen, a protected minority, until the ruler doesn't want to protect them anymore, like they did in 1951 with the Farhud, 2 days of pogrom, violent disposition against, 1941, violent disposition against the Jews of Iraq. That led to killing of hundreds of Jews in Iraq, and led my family to leave Iraq in 1951 and returning back home. Those stories are important because for me it was part of that was the background that I grew up with. Sometimes I'm hearing people saying that some of the Mizrahi Jews, the Jews of the Middle East and North Africa, and their descendants are hostile towards our neighbors, or have suspicion, or have this I don't know, even as far as saying that we're racist towards them, which is completely bizarre, because we are the people of the Middle East. We've stayed here and we lived here under this ruling. So if anything, it's trauma. It's trauma of remembering what happened to us and being more cautious and being more nationalistic, because knowing that nationalism saved us at the end. So it's not, not nationalistic in a sense that is oppressing others, but being nationalistic while accepting others, but also remembering that we have to take care of our lives. And this is really connected to the trauma that they had. So for me to serve in the army was a way, and also growing up in Israel and growing up with a lot of violence that I've seen with terror attacks, and the second intifada that I grew up in, almost being killed in a terror attack when I was 12. All of this was in the back of my mind when I joined the army. And I had a lot of trauma that I carried with me into the army, and I wanted to do something to end this conflict. So I served as a humanitarian officer, and I worked for 5 years with Palestinians, Palestinian civilians, with human rights organizations, NGOs, UN agencies, trying to improve the situation of the people on the other side, which it was very tough, knowing that I came from a family that was oppressed by Arabs, by Arab countries and Arab and Muslim countries, to being the one that is trying to bring peace. I can't hear you now. Sorry. I can't hear you at all. Okay. By the mute, there's like an error. If you click it, you can choose a microphone. So try maybe to pick another microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Okay, so you can hear me now, right? Okay, wonderful. So you can hear me, and then when I finish the question, I'll unmute myself. So we'll do that. So not perfect, but I wanted to just, it's interesting. You talked about how, you had these pogroms, if you want to use these terms, certainly that's what it was, against the Mizrahi Jews in North Africa in the early 1940s. And although most people hearing this, of course, would be cognizant of the fact that the early 1940s were prior to Israel's existence, I think that that's just an important little side note that would be pointed out, that it was not Israel's creation which was the impetus for the anti-Semitism for these people, right? We read about Baghdad being previously 1/3 Jewish, right? How you had this Jewish quarter in Tunis and many parts of Morocco. And yet these were predating, these anti-Semitic attacks were predating the creation of the state of Israel. So let me ask you then, what was the impetus, if we can try to, although impossible to say that there's a rationale for anti-Semitism, was it just anti-Semitism in general, the fear of the other, or was still this nascent fear of this Zionist movement, or was it sort of Nazi propaganda? What exactly was it that was making this anti-Semitism bubble up in Jews in Arab lands?
So it's a really good point. It's interesting because just yesterday on my Twitter account, a group of I assume white supremacist people that think that the white race is preferred to everyone else were attacking me on Twitter, and they said, well, maybe you should ask yourself why Jews are being forced out from all those countries, that's something that they love to ask, and it's for me the answer is simple. I mean, it's rather than try and solving their own problems, societies that have to face poverty or diseases or war or anything else, they always want to try and find a scapegoat. And throughout history, it's not something new. I mean, we discussed this recent history because this is the era that we live in. But it happened throughout history, and it's often we. As global community, we tend to forget history or think that things are better, but things are never better. Like history repeats itself, and Jews are just are always the convenient scapegoat, and that's what happened in Iraq. That's what happened. That's sometimes I'm hearing in my talks on college campuses, professors or people that are academic scholars will tell me, well, the Iraqis, you can't blame the Iraqis for the Farhud because it was incited by the Nazis. Yes, it was incited by the Nazis, but there were impressionate minds that were willing to be a part of it. Like the Nazis were not the one killing the Jews in Iraq. The Nazis were not the ones that, it was them inciting it, but it wasn't just them. They collaborated with Iraqi citizens. My grandmother had to watch her best friend being raped in the streets and killed by an Iraqi police officer. And the following day to see a mother and 9 children being killed in the streets by Iraqi officers. Those stories are not of Nazis from Europe coming to kill them. It was Iraqis, Muslims, and Arabs that took part in this killing. So the thing is that anti-Semitism is not unique for only to one area, or it's not unique to only one group of people. Anti-Semitism can come from anywhere, and it's often meant to be, societies are just trying to find a scapegoat, someone to blame for all their misfortune. And as we've seen in the Holocaust, it was the Jews of Europe, but it was also the Jews of the Middle East and North Africa. It was also the Jews of Ethiopia. And we're seeing it now as well. I mean, in our time, from blaming Jews, the head of the KKK says that the Jews and the Zionists are working together to invent the coronavirus or to spread the coronavirus, and blaming Jews for the disease. Every time societies are getting to a point that things are getting difficult, we saw it with in Spain and the Black Death, and we're seeing it now returning. And it's I think we need to be very cautious to make sure that we are aware to any changes and any shifts in societies, because it's we are the easiest scapegoat, and we have been for generations.
I think that there's a lot of improvement that needs to be done in educating the world about the experiences of Ashkenazi, or more specifically European Jews, in the Holocaust. Now, you've talked a lot, obviously, about your Berber, your Mizrahi heritage and your identity. Why is it, do you think, I think it goes without saying, I'm not even going to ask you if we need to do more educating the world about that aspect of Jewish history, but why do you think that is so unknown, both in the Jewish world and certainly all the more so in the non-Jewish world? Why is that just a big unknown that people don't know about the history? We think of Jewish suffering in the last century, in the last 60 years, as a purely European or an almost exclusively European phenomenon. We don't know about the 800,000 Jewish refugees from Arab lands. Everybody knows about the 800,000 Palestinian or Arab refugees from Israel. Why is this area of Jewish and Israeli history so completely unknown?
I mean, you said it perfectly. Education about the Holocaust and the tragedy that happened in Europe, that a third of the Jewish people were killed. Even that is not where it needs to be. People are still uneducated. I'm seeing it online. I'm seeing it on campuses in schools that I speak at. Right now I'm in Israel, but I live in London, and I meet people that are not Jewish, and that what seems to us as the word should know, the word promised us that they would know. Even that is not half or quarter as where it should be. So there's so much work to do to educate people about the Holocaust. And I think that, it's interesting also, Robert, what you're asking, because I was discussing this with my grandmother, my only grandparents that is alive, my grandmother from Iraq, and I said that just recently I found out about all the horrific things that they went through. She never told me this stuff. She always was saying how beautiful Iraq was, how she loved Baghdad, how she had great neighbors that protected her during the Farhud. But she never told me about the tragedies, and I tried to understand. And she said, I heard about my brothers and sisters, the Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, coming to Israel and telling us about the horrific things that they went through. What we went through was nothing compared to the institutionalized genocide of 6 million Jews. And for them, it was, we are all one family, and large part of our community has been going through such tragedy that it's not our time to speak about ours. And I think that now, and I'm seeing it online, I'm seeing it with publications, more and more Mizrahi voices are starting to speak about our trauma as well, while making sure that we make people understand that it's not one on top of the other, and that it's just to expand the understanding and the education of the experience of Jews. But I think it's this constant fear. And to be honest, I also have it until today. I feel uncomfortable a lot of times to speak about what happened to my family, if in any way it will come for some people on the account of the Holocaust, or if people will tell me, right, so let's talk about the Mizrahi Jews and not talk about Ashkenazi Jews. That gives me it gives me anxiety when I speak about these issues, just because of that, because it's so important for me that I know how bad Holocaust education is. So I think this is the constant struggle for us, to make sure that it's not both, it's just one story of the whole Jewish people, of what happened to us, and just to expand it rather than speaking instead of one another, and not to compare anything. Like, there's no comparison to be made. There's just more stories. So I do see some change, and I think more people are opening up to it, but it's up to all of us, everyone that are listening here, to make sure that we are expanding the conversation, and that we're doing both, that we're teaching about the Holocaust, we're telling people the stories, but we're also telling them the stories that they haven't heard about Jews of the Middle East and North Africa, that will actually help all Jews. It's not just the story of the Jews of the Middle East and North Africa, it's the story of all Jewish community, and it's the story of Israel. It's a major part of Israel today. I mean, 55% of Israeli Jews are descendant of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. And I think it's an important fact that can help us a lot when we're doing advocacy for the legitimacy of Israel. And as many would probably agree, you know, anti-Zionism today is are most often anti-Semitic.
You can hear me now? Okay, so I think that's a good pivot. You know, we talked about anti-Zionism, and I think, you know, this is an opportunity to talk about, you know, what the title of today, which is, of course, intersectionality. So explain for us exactly what that means. We hear this term a lot, and I think that, you know, those of us in the pro-Israel sphere, or who certainly are supportive of Israel, look at what the anti-Israel groups have done. You know, there's a famous picture I remember seeing a few years ago from Ferguson, Missouri, where the Black Lives Matter movement started. And there was a sign that said, "From Palestine to Ferguson, end racism now." And I think for me, it was a great example of how a cause that had nothing to do with Israel or Jews or Arabs or the Middle East has been co-opted in a not insignificant way. Certainly, I want to ask you about, you know, to some degree, there was an organization in Toronto called Queers Against Israeli Apartheid. I certainly want to ask you, you know, how these movements have been, particularly in the progressive sphere, have been able to be co-opted. But tell us, in your experience, what exactly, you know, this term means, and what it really means as far as the context of, you know, intersectionality as far as Israel's concerned. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah, it is the topic of the conversation today, and I think, you know, we need to be able to separate that, because the idea itself of intersectionality, like many of those social justice ideas, on paper sounds great. I mean, the idea is that I'll just read the definition itself. It's the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group. So it's basically to try and understand that a Black person in society that is majority white will have different experience than a Black woman. Like Black women will probably have it more difficult because women are still not equal in some societies, according to this set of ideas. The problem became when intersectionality was turning more into a fight for that you can't fight for one group of marginalized people without fighting for another. I mean, it wasn't a problem. It's also, again, great on paper. But as we move forward, we realized that there was one group that is constantly being excluded actively from intersectional spaces. So conversations about LGBTQ rights had to be, as you said, I mean, and for me, as someone that was served as an openly gay commander in the army, and I'm very proud of my identity. But as I arrived to America, and I lived in Seattle for 2 years in 2012 till 14, and that was, you know, the time that this conversation just started. And I remember hearing it and thinking that it's, you know, it's a great thing. Like maybe they would want to accept me as an Israeli, as son of refugees, as a son of North African and Iraqi parents, that is also gay, that can understand everything they speak about, but they constantly kept on pushing me out of it. And I remember I was working with the University of Washington with the students there, and the Jewish student said, "Hey, can you reach out to the queer student group, because they have a center there, and we want you to ask them, maybe they can invite you to speak there." And I emailed the person that is in charge, and I said, "Hey, I'm an Israeli queer person as well, and I would love to meet and speak about how we can fight for LGBTQ rights and LGBTQ equality." And the email that I got back was just horrific, accusing me of war crimes, of being a killer, of being a murderer, of promoting pinkwashing. Pinkwashing is a term that was invented it was appropriated from a breast cancer cause. So you had pink ribbon on products that benefited breast cancer fight, but then some people found out that, you know, companies are giving very little, so they use the term pinkwashing to say it. And then the anti-Israel movement has appropriated this term to say that Israel gave, basically what they're saying is that Israel gave LGBTQ rights to Israelis to cover up or to whitewash, to pinkwash in this case, the atrocities that are happening here. And it's the most bizarre thing that I remember reading this email. This person, they go by they, told me all the stuff that was just, it was so hard to read someone telling me that because I'm Israeli, nothing else matters, and using their queer identity against me, and to say because I'm a queer person, I know that you shouldn't be able to speak here because you're coming to because you're Israeli. So basically, this person was doing exactly what they were accusing me of. So instead of, while accusing me of pinkwashing, they were the one using their identity to make sure that I'll be silenced. And it's and more than anything, I mean, the idea that or the accusation of pinkwashing basically means that all the advancement that was made in Israel just doesn't matter. And if you'll have an Iranian gay person coming to speak on campus anywhere, they will never be silenced, even though their government is hanging gay people, and even while our government is actually paying for LGBTQ rights groups and for Pride Parade. All of this is just irrelevant when we're talking about Israel, because this hatred of Israel it runs so deep into those causes, and we're seeing it everywhere. I have to say, I mean, personally, I've been rejected from so many social justice causes, but it doesn't make me stop from speaking about it and trying to force my place into those causes. I don't think, I know some people and many people in the Jewish community have this perception that the battle is lost. But for me, the battle is not lost. I still think that we can make a difference and explain to them how difficult it is. That's what I'm devoting my time for, to try and change that and try to show them how challenging it is, and how wrong what they're doing is. And I just wrote an article a couple of days ago for Newsweek about the Grammys award, because in the Grammys you have all those singers and the entertainment industry of America coming to one stage. Everyone from Beyonce to Cardi B, everyone were there. But while if it was, if any artist even remotely engaged in racism or homophobia or any other form of bigotry, they would be immediately canceled. Like other artists, like Roseanne Barr was canceled years ago for making a racist comment on Twitter. However, you had people like Dua Lipa that posted anti-Semitic things on her Instagram. You had people like Tamika Mallory, the former head of the Women's March, that is a good friend of Louis Farrakhan and known anti-Semite, that is calling Jews termites and saying that Jews are turning people gay, saying all these horrific things to thousands of his followers, tens of thousands of his followers. And she said that Louis Farrakhan is a great man, the greatest of them all, actually. And she refused to apologize for it when she was challenged. And there were a lot of other anti-Semitic incidents involved with the Women's March in her organization. But she was front and center in American TV, in mainstream. And the same with Dua Lipa. So that, for me, it's like this tells you the whole story. You can get canceled for anything except for being an anti-Semite.
I read your Newsweek article. It was fantastic, and I wanted to ask you actually a little more about that. And those who haven't, of course, should check out Honest Reporting Canada's Facebook page. We posted about that a couple of days ago. So tell us, because in the article you were saying that if, like as you said a moment ago, if you were to employ any kind of bigoted language against any group, group, that you would find yourself on the receiving end of cancellation or criticism. Now, why is it in your experience here specifically that Jews are exempt from that? Is that just part of a much larger anti-Semitism? Because of course those who look at anti-Semitism, it's often called the longest hatred. There's something about it. It exists in places where there are no Jews, right? You see people even today in Indonesia and Poland, there's anti-Semitism where there are virtually no Jews anymore. Is it just that this is a unique value of anti-Semitism, that it exists even places that, where there are no Jews? Or is there something somewhat unique about it now in the progressive milieu where this, you can't deny, anti-Semitism, Pashut anti-Semitism, that's wrong. You can't say Jews are bad, but you can deny Jews collective rights, right? In the sense of like Tamika Mallory, when she came back from Israel a few years ago on a trip, one of the co-founders of the Women's March, and she was asked, does Israel have a right to exist? She said, everybody has a right to exist, but you can't do it by stealing and robbing and so on and so forth. So let me ask you, is that just good old-fashioned anti-Semitism just now in a different box? Or is it that the progressive movement is just they say they don't hate Jews, but they just hate it when Jews have rights? Tell us about that.
Yes, that's an excellent point. It's almost feels like often it's not about what I mean. For me, with Israel, I saw it. You know, I've been doing this work for 12 years, and before that, for 5 years, I was in the army. I've devoted my adult life for the Jewish people. I've been fighting it and seeing everything. I mean, when college students that I speak to now that they were just babies, I was doing this work, and I see that, I've been doing it for so long that I've seen everything. And I saw that every time I was speaking about Israel and I was trying to make a positive case, it was immediately dismissed. It was immediately, you know, everything had to be irrelevant, and to find a reason. You know, we spoke about pinkwashing, but there's other forms of washing today. Greenwashing, when Israel talks about environmental rights. There's brownwashing when we're talking about Mizrahi Jews. There's no, Mizrahi washing. That's another term that they invented. The anti-Zionist Jewish Voices Online in 972 magazine, anti-Israel magazine, were saying that I invented a new form of hasbara. So I get these attacks everywhere, even from our community. Some people don't like some of the things that we're saying, but I'm seeing that it really doesn't matter what Israel does. It's always just the idea that Israeli exists. That you even mention Israel is a triggering word for people. And I realize that it's more than just, you know, what we're doing or not doing. It doesn't matter how much I speak about humanitarian causes and everything we're doing in Israel, and how incredible and so much advance that Israel has done, that, you know, it's just it always goes back to this idea that I'm proud Israeli, that I would be accepted. You know, the type of good Jews that are being accepted in society are the ones that are willing to bash Israel and are willing to be, you know, to advocate for Israel to be powerless. And the more you are speaking about how you hate it, then you will be more accepted. And I think that for me personally, I feel like that's um, it's insane, but it's really tapping into this anti-Semitic idea that it's not about what Israel does; it's more about the existence of Jewish power. Israel represents this Jewish power, and Israel shouldn't have to be perfect for people to allow it to exist. And no other country is perfect, right? And when we're seeing today, and it was interesting, I saw today that the anti-Israel website, Electronic Intifada, was published a piece about how the Uyghur Muslims in China are not really, you know, that it's a hoax, that it's not real. And they did it. It was Ali Abunimah, an anti-Semitic, anti-Israel writer, for this, you know, I wouldn't say mainstream, but very highly regarded publication, and a lot of people are listening to it and reading. Me personally, not. I'm sure a lot of your audience would agree, but they would go as far as justifying an attempt genocide against Muslims in China, just to make sure that the conversation about Israel can and their anti-Israel sentiments can be can continue. And I think that's really telling you the whole story when Muslims are being killed in China, or when gay men are being hanged in Iran, or gay men are being sent to prison in Qatar, or violence against minorities is happening all over the world. That doesn't matter. What matters is when Israel, what Israel didn't even do. So I think it's really, that's what it is. It's about Jewish power that those people don't like.
One of the we've had a couple comments here, as you may have seen, who have said basically, so what's the point? Not what at what I know you were saying that you are somewhat of a hopeful or an optimist that we still can win over many of these progressive causes, but I guess there's still probably a lot of members in the Jewish or pro-Israel community who would look at this and say, what, you know, what cause for optimism do you have? I look now and seeing what's happening with the Asian community, particularly in the U.S., which is suffering a lot of, you know, hate crimes. You said there was a shooting last week in the States, and I don't have a crystal ball, but I would be very surprised if that community, which is large and influential, is probably not being identified right now by anti-Israel activists as one where there's opportunities for, you know, I know I sound tinfoil hat, but, you know, infiltrated, much as you said, you know, the LGBT community has been, or you know, the Latino or the Black community has been. what hope? So it's a two-part question. One, what hope is there? And two, do you see the same thing happening with the Asian community? Because we're seeing this unfolding before our eyes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of similarities between the Asian community and the Jewish community, and I think that we're both are trying desperately to be heard and to be seen. I mean, for the Jewish community, from what I'm hearing from the people that I speak with and I'm in touch with, it's really hard to feel like you are seen, and it's constant work. I mean, if you look at the ethnic studies in California, it was a project of 2 years that tons of Jewish organizations have been working on and trying to fix and improve it and include Jews in this curriculum. It was a hard battle. Of course, the result was not perfect. It couldn't be perfect, but they knew that that ethnic studies is going to go on, and it's going to be in universities. But their goal was to make sure that the Jews are included in it. The result again wasn't perfect, but it was better than not having Jews at all. And I think what I've seen online is from both, there was a lot of well-meaning people that didn't know the hard work of Jewish organizations, that they've been doing it for so long. Not seeing that for 2 years, the Jewish Federation in Los Angeles, Jimena, Stand With Us, the Jewish Holocaust Museum, so many organizations were working there in California to make a difference. And it's, and we're often seeing it that it's, we're trying our best to work together, and we need as a community to come together and to, and not to fight each other, and to try and fight these causes and make sure that we are, that we're getting seen, and that we are, that I think the worst thing would be to like fight among each other. And that's, that's why I keep on calling for unity all the time. I think that this would be the key to really get this visibility that we need, just like the Asian community and other marginalized groups that are excluded from the conversation about intersectionality and social justice, is for us to come together and make sure that, that we are visible. It's important to remember. I know we have Israel. That's, first of all, it's important to remember that we have Israel, and that's the big difference from history. But it's also important to remember that we are still a minority. A tiny minority in many countries, less than 2%, and it's we won't be able to win this fight alone, and we have to find allies, and the allies that we need are are people that we can't give up on any ally. That's what I'm trying to say. So I think that's why it's important for us to see what, I mean, the Asian community was also trying to do that in the last week, to speak up. Eventually it worked, but it's also important for us to do that and find allies and stay united in this fight.
Elements, when we talk about, that the Jewish community, for example, I mentioned the Asian community just as an example because it's in the news right now. We have a lot of, I think, movement to support Asians who are being facing, anti-Asian attacks. But with respect to, Israel itself, I think many people have argued that, well, as Jews, individuals, of course, were anti-Semitic. For example, here in Canada, the New Democratic Party, which is sort of the center-left socialist party, is now having a whole broigus, a whole sort of balagan, if you will, talking about the IRA definition of anti-Semitism and whether that party should be defining it. And I was just reading last night that there was a very anti-Israel member of parliament named Sven Robinson, who previously went over to Ramallah and got in a whole fist fight with an Israeli officer about 15 years ago. And this guy was saying, this MP was saying, well, this stifles criticism of Israel. And of course, anti-Semitism is wrong and anti-Semitism is terrible. And I believe his quote was, we should be fighting it with every fiber of our being. Of course, this is a guy who also has argued that basically Israel's, this terrible occupying racist regime. And what we tend to see is that the people who say, as individuals, Jews, of course, anti-Semitism is wrong, but Israel is a country, I mean, look at it with the vaccine race and look at it's such a wonderful, developing first world country. It's hard to look at Israel as a victim. So tell us a little bit about that, where people tend to look at victims, as you said, victim means poor, victim means downtrodden, victim means the underdog. But of course, we look at the Jewish people now, and people would say, particularly Ashkenazi Jews, you can't even tell they're Jews, How can we articulate on one hand, Hen, that we don't want to have, so to speak, a victim fetish where we don't want to say Jews are always down and love us, we're right because we're suffering, That's not what necessarily we want to go for, but we also want to say that we have suffered, and the fact that Israel, the collective, so to speak, representation of the Jews today is successful, it doesn't mean that we haven't suffered. How do we straddle that?
Yeah, well, before I answer this question, I just want to say that the idea that IRA is not good enough, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism is not good enough, and I hear it often, is the most ridiculous thing and the most horrific, actually, thing that people can say to us. I mean, which other minority will not be allowed to define hatred towards them? And of course, we'll have fringe voices that are against IRA, and that are saying, like in every community, you have the minority of opinions that are being tokenized and used as, this is, here's like being used as if they represent the whole community. Of course they don't. 95% of American Jews are Zionists and pro-Israel, and I'm sure that in Canada the numbers are just as high. And Jews all over the world, I mean, majority of Jews are Zionists. So to say that IRA is not good enough because it's Zionist is just insane. And to say that these people, I don't know this case specifically, but this person from Canada is saying that he wants to fight anti-Semitism to his bones. He has to listen to Jews, and he has to really let Jews define it for themselves, and do the hard work of listening to the majority of the Jewish community. Of course, listen to the fringe, to the radicals. I get the radicals all the time. I see them I see those trolls that are coming everywhere that I'm speaking, or everywhere I'm online, and trying to like attack me and to get to me. It's very cute and entertaining, but I think it's important to listen to really take the heart, and that's what we're doing with other marginalized community and other minorities, but not with Jews. So that's really problematic. And I think that I'm sorry, your other question was how do we balance between between not being victims, not playing into this, understanding that we're not playing into trying to be victims all the time, but also understand, but also trying to make people understand that we want to be included and we want to be regarded as human beings. I think what we're asking for is just to be looked at as humans, and I think that's what we are so bothered by. That's what so many Jews are so bothered by. It's just that we feel like we are. The anti-Semitism, what they're doing is not just to attack Jews, it's also to strip us off of our humanity. And that's the biggest fight, to make people understand that we're human. So I'm not saying that we need to go to every demonstration and make it all about us. And I don't think that, anti-Semitism should be before any other ethnicity, or ethnic studies shouldn't, or to dismiss every ethnic studies unless they're learning only about anti-Semitism. We want our place. We want to have our place within the nations, but we just want to be regarded as humans. And I think that's the important thing that we have to fight for, is to humanize our community.
I guess, the question then is, sort of pivoting back to humanizing this, then people, I guess, to sort of continue to play this devil's advocate, they would say, well, humanize it is one thing, but you can't say that, what happened to the Jewish people, whether the Mizrahi community in the 40s, whether the sort of the exodus from Iraq and from the Maghreb, North Africa, the Holocaust and all these terrible things, but they would say, but today, Jews are still not this victimized group. We could point them to statistics both here in Canada and in the States showing that we remain Jews the #1 target of hate crimes, which no doubt you're familiar with. We could talk about how Israel is consistently pointed at the UN, that there's more resolutions at the UN General Assembly targeting Israel than all other countries combined targeting one. But they consistently will still say, okay, but Israel is still not a victim. And they would say that by the very fact that Israel is more powerful, it therefore can't be right. And of course, we know that there's not inherent logic to this. The very fact that, we say that, might, isn't a bad thing in itself. But how do we get around this? I wonder, in your experience, when they say, but, let's talk about the vaccines right now with Israel. They would say, Israel has these vaccines and they vaccinated its population. Israel has an obligation. And we've, certainly in Honest Reporting, we've talked about the number of vaccines that Israel has, donated to the Palestinians, and the fact that the Palestinian Authority has gone and said, we don't need Israel, we have our own government. But how do we still manage to articulate this almost as I think it was David Frum who sort of coined this term, the soft bigotry of low expectations, right? That they look at the Palestinians and they're almost treating them perpetually as victims. And if you're a Palestinian advocate, why should you ever not want to be a victim? Because that's the best place to be. How do we articulate? I know I'm saying a lot here, but how do we communicate this to progressives who tend to look at weakness as a virtue and who don't look at Israel and the Jewish people's success, high income, educated, and so on and so forth? And we say, we almost don't like you, Davka, because you're successful. How do we get around that?
That's an excellent point. I mean, we have to correct that, and it's very hard. It's hard when I see members of our community. Okay, sorry, I'll take a step back. We need to call out anti-Semitism, no matter where it comes from, no matter who's propagating it, no matter who's doing it. We have to call it out. It's really important that we call it from left and right. But I think that for us, it's important to also recognize that we have to be also part of a part of the conversation of the progressive. We can't. The progressive movement and left-wing people are not going to disappear tomorrow. I know that a lot of Jews on the right think that we can just dismiss them and everything will be okay, and they're just gonna left-wing Jews and progressive Jews will just disappear, or the left-wing as a political agenda would just disappear. It won't disappear. It's not going anywhere. And there's also, there's always a shift. There's always a left wing in power, and then following that right wing in power, and left wing and right wing. It goes like this. And we can't alienate half of the political spectrum. And I find that a lot of Jews, and that's also my battles within our community with a lot of people, to try and make them understand that when I fight for all Jews, 100%. Like, I've never fought for any. Even if I fight for Ethiopian Jews, I'm still fighting for all Jews. It's not that I fight just for them. But it's important for us to make the case of Jewish people being marginalized group. But we can only make it once we address and understand that racism still exists. We can't deny that. And I know some people on the right want to change it, or to change a nuance, or to speak about it in a different way. But we're not the ones to tell the Black community what racism is. We have to listen to them just as much as we want them to listen to us about anti-Semitism. Same thing with homophobia or with the feminist movement. We can't tell other communities or other groups what is bigotry towards them, and we have to listen to them, and we have to support them while we are fighting for our place. And I can tell you that, of course, there's in the Black community, there's some, in Black Lives Matter, an example, there's some anti-Semitic voices. Of course there is. There are also some homophobic voices that I can tell you, as a gay person, I see that. And there's also, in the same thing with, feminists, that there are feminist voices that are against trans rights, very famous ones that are against trans rights. And it happens in every community. You have voices that are no social justice movement or cause is perfect. But what we need to do as Jews, and I think that's what I'm trying to do, is to be part of those social justice movements and progressive causes, to change them, and to listen to them and to support them, but also bringing up our social issues and the fact that anti-Semitism is an issue that progressives and social justice causes should care about. And yeah, I mean, it's just I wish that more Jews, and that's a plea that I'm making for all Jews that are listening. When you fight for Jews, really think about what's best for Jews, not what's best for your political cause or what will make you feel better. Try and think long-term, what will help our community, and how we're going to fight it correctly. And I'm not saying that everyone should turn into a progressive social justice activist. Absolutely not. I wish, but if you don't feel like this is your place, fine. Just make sure that you're being strategic and thinking long term. And I think that's my hope, that we as a community will be able to listen to different opinions and not attack each other, and to work together to to bring anti-Semitism into the conversation, that people would understand that we are also a marginalized minority that is not a victim. Again, we don't need to be the constant victim, but we need to make people understand that we are still victims. It's just nuance. So I mean, I hear exactly what you're saying. I wish I had just one line answer to you to say this is the simple thing that we can do. But it's just more complicated and nuanced than that. So it's just about us listening to one another and less attacking one another.
Right. Okay. I appreciate that, and I understand it's a nuanced question. Listen, if you had a simple one-word answer to eradicate anti-Semitism, I would want to hear that for sure. Tell us. We have a few minutes for questions now, so I want to just sort of jump into that. We have a question from Ellie here, who says there's a new movement by young progressive Jews on campus called the New Zionist Congress. What do you think about it? One of the questions is, how can we keep supporting the young progressive Jews, as you said, which I think is very insightful. Whether you like it or not, this progressive movement, this wing of people and Jews specifically, is not going away. So we can either pretend it's going away at our peril, or we can engage with it. So if we want to, engage with it, how can we support the young progressive pro-Israel Jews and allies who love Israel, who are Zionist and who find themselves progressive? How can we arm them and continue to help them, not just arm them to advocate, but arm them to feel engaged so they don't feel like they're alone? How do you, no doubt you've had many of these conversations, how can we help support them and so we don't lose them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a brilliant point, and I've been doing it. I'm working at Tel Aviv Institute. That's my employer, and we're working on several programs. We had a fellowship a few years ago, and we're working with young people, and it's really important to support young Jews that are advocating against anti-Semitism. I would say to work with them and listen to them, and most importantly, not to attack them. It's like, I think it's that's the important part here, that we need to let them do what they're doing, and they know better than us. Like, young Jews know, young progressive Jews that are fighting this fight for years, that haven't started like now, or that some of them do need guidance, but and I see them, and I help them as much as I can if they want to listen. Sometimes, don't be offended, they're kids, but sometimes they don't want to listen. That's fine. I would just not, and I see adults attacking kids, young Jews online, and that's something that I really wish we stopped doing, that we just listen to them and let them, do their thing. Like, they know what's best for those causes. They are part of those causes. And if they need, and just not attacking. Like, if that will happen, that will be amazing. And then again, when we see that young Jews are attacked, to be there for them, to support them, to offer them support. But again, let them take the lead on what they know works, and don't, we shouldn't try and change them.
Sort of a related question to that, we were talking about, this sort of intersectionality and how these anti-Israel groups have sort of jumped into bed, or certainly attempted to, with progressive causes. And we talked about, Asians and LGBTQ and so on. So, certainly, tell me, would I be off base in saying then that it would be incumbent upon Jewish/pro-Israel movements to do likewise? Because it's sort of funny, when we look at the kibbutz movement as an example, we look at it 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, that was everybody. Bernie Sanders volunteered on a kibbutz, right? Who would have thought, right? People like this. So it seems that, of course, that Israel used to be the darling of the left, used to be the darling of the socialist or progressive causes, and now in many ways it's the boogeyman of it. So it seems to me, certainly from the peanut gallery where I said, that it can be won back. So any advice then, for how we could go about winning? Because there's a question from David here which asks, it seems to him that these anti-Israel groups are doing just that, and certainly that's my perception. Tell us if we're mistaken. But how can we then go about fixing that then, and actually have the pro-Israel cause engage with? We talked about the Asians and LGBTQ and Black and Latino. How can we do it?
Yeah, absolutely. You're making an excellent point, and I think, what you're doing, Robert, hosting this event and other events that are helping Jews learn more, our community learn more and expand their horizon on those topics. Like, this is the most important thing. We can't, where the old tactics have failed, and to try and insist that people will just change their minds about us, it's probably not going to happen. And or to fight the left or to fight intersectionality, like to fight the whole, social justice movement will not. I'm just personally, I just don't think that it will work. But again, everything I say here is my opinion. We can disagree, and that's okay. But I think that the way to do it is to engage, and I hear that a lot from senior executives of Jewish organizations that have told me in the past, you tell us to join intersectionality movements or to have our voice heard in the spaces, but they don't want to hear us. And I understand that they don't want to hear you. And I understand that they are in the point, a lot of them feel like anyone that is pro-Israel is racist and they don't want to hear from them. I felt it on my flesh from 2016, I mean, way before that, but in 2016, 300 students broke into a talk of mine in London, broke through the window, crashed everything, wanted to just make sure that I won't speak. Or just last year, right before COVID in January, I think it was, in Vassar College, dozens of students rushed into my talk with music and tried to get me to stop speaking. It's hard, and I've been doing it alone for a long time. I mean, with all of you supporting me and all of our work together. But I've been, the constant subject of hatred and anti-Semitism, and I keep on fighting to be heard in these intersectional spaces. And I speak about these issues. I also care about these issues personally. Of course, first of all, I'm Jew. Like, that's before anything else. I am Jewish. Like, and I know that it's true for anti-Semites as well. It doesn't matter what I am. It doesn't matter if they call me a person of color, if they call me a queer, or whatever name they want to use. First of all, they hate me. Like, the hatred of anti-Semites is because I'm a Jew. And my skin color doesn't matter, or who I am, or what's my name doesn't matter. But I feel like, what I've been challenging and what I've been struggling with, and what I think is the answer, is to keep on speaking and to speak louder, and to not shy away from those progressive spaces, because we, even if you disagree with some of their politics, and even if you see a conversation with people that you think that are totally on the opposite side of you politically, and you cannot agree with them about anything, just listen to them, make sure that they know that you're listening, and and explain to them about our community. They need to listen. But I think that they will listen best when they see that you are part of their fight. So I would say, we always have been, I mean, from the days of Martin Luther King until today, Jews have always been on the side of social justice causes. It's just a matter of reclaiming our place in it. That's what I'm trying to do. And I hope others will join me as well.
One more question we have, and there's actually a question from Sue-Ann Levy, who's a journalist with the Toronto Sun newspaper here, and I'll read what she said. Sort of a two-part question. So she says, one, I don't know if you were familiar with this restaurant or this food store in Toronto called Food Benders, which last year was posting just constant anti-Israel propaganda on their stores, became a whole thing. And Sue-Ann was saying that as a Jewish journalist, as a queer journalist as well, I don't know if she used that term, but she certainly is quite open about that here in Toronto, that she's been subject to a very targeted campaign of harassment. So question is, I know you've talked about that and you've alluded to that as well, how you deal with that personally, and then two, how you might deal with Jews who jump onto that anti-Israel bandwagon as well and say, actually, somebody just asked me last night, they sent me a message from a Jew, from actually an Israeli professor who I won't name, who said that Israel is basically the worst example of ethnic cleansing in the world. And they said, now, of course, they said, well, 95% of Jews are Zionists. And they said, perfect, that answers it. But there are so many Jews who are very happy to be that token Jew, who can be used as an example to say, look, not all Jews are that. And they say IRA, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism stifles criticism of Israel. So there you go, this one Jew says it. How do you, two parts, one, deal with targeted campaign of harassment, and two, how do you deal with the Jews who jump onto this bandwagon and help to neutralize their noxious impact?
Well, first of all, Sue-Ann and Denise are good friends of mine, and I absolutely adore both of them. And I know I've seen a lot of the harassment that they're going through. And I mean, I know harassment even here on the chat. I mean, I see some stuff that I know that it comes from white supremacists, from people with faceless accounts that are attacking me, and it's very hard, and it's challenging to see that everything I said here is no different than any talk that I had. I'm not changing anything I say. I keep I think that the best thing is to have consistency and to remember that we can't be everything to everyone and still be true to who we are. And for me, what leads me is my love for my people, for all of my people. And that's, and I know that those attacks are coming, that they're coming at me are just a sign that what I'm doing is right. And I'm making a difference. And Suan is also making a difference. A lot of people that are breaking the status quo and creating, creating a conversation and creating thoughtful engagement that's are going to be targeted. People hate nuance, like especially haters. So so I would say to just keep your consistency and keep on calling it out, and don't, and remind yourself every time when you're getting attacked that they clearly are really energetic and enthusiastic about silencing you. So it means that you need to continue speaking because what you're saying is so important. I mean, if not, if people disagree with you, fine, people will have respectful disagreement with you. But if they're doing an harassment campaign, first of all, that those people are insane sometimes. Well, I mean, that those people are not okay, maybe not insane, that was the wrong word. But those people are not okay, clearly. But and also that that they are really full of hate, and you just need to be happy that that you're not them. And I'm sorry, Robert, do you mind repeating the second part of the question, please?
Sure. The question was how to deal with Jews who, are sort of give credence and oxygen to this movement as Jews.
Right, and that's another part. And I would, I see it also. I see a lot of Jews that I disagree with that are being used as tokens, and people are saying, this is the Jewish community, although we all know it's not. I would say that the best way for us to fight tokenism is to speak louder and to have more voices. Not to speak louder, rather to have more voices. Because the more of us speak online, the more of us speak in society. Right now, because of COVID, most of the things are online. But once this is over, like the more we speak and the more we are commenting on articles, the more we are making our voice heard, things are getting, I mean, I know we are a minority, but each one of you has access to websites, to Facebook, to Twitter, to Instagram, to all those platforms where anti-Semitism really is spreading. And I think that the best way to fight it will be to speak louder and to make sure. And sorry, the best way to fight tokenism is to be, is to have more of us speaking, and then those minority remain what they are, minority. So I encourage everyone to just use this. Everything is in the tip of your fingers. It's not very hard to, to get online and to support. Honest Reporting is posting a lot of good stuff that you can follow and engage with, and make sure that you're doing it. And I know it's difficult, it's not comfortable. I get exactly how frustrating it is. I don't know it as much as, I mean, now that I live in London, I can see a bit of it, but I'm sure you're growing up with in a society that, in a country, I grew up in a Jewish country, so I didn't really had to deal with anti-Semitism the same way. I dealt with terrorism, but not anti-Semitism in the same way. So so I can't imagine exactly how it is, but I know how I'm doing this work specifically, specific work. I felt a lot of it, and I do, and if you Google my name, you will find anything from saying that I'm a Mossad agent to saying that that I'm a homophobe or that I hate Jews. A lot of stuff is spread online, but it's, that's where I'm finished. I'll just say the last sentence is that we have to fight it because it's greater than just all of us or the sum of all of us. It's generations, and it's our ancestors. And what leads me is really, I said, love for my people, but it's also to try and make my ancestors proud, and to remember that anti-Semitism was not invented in my generation, and it wouldn't be over in the next generation. What we need to do, what we have to do, and that's, I think personally, like that's something that is mandatory for all of us, is to continue fighting it wherever we see it and never stop, no matter how tiring it is. It's a duty, but it's also the most noble thing we can do, to fight for really the most oppressed minority in the history of mankind, but the one that is the most resilient.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Hen, I mean, this has been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation, and we've gotten lots of tons of positive feedback. And I think, your young age and your ability to have already, done the amount of education that you're doing is a testament to that. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, everybody else. Before I just let you go, I just want to let everybody know about our next Insider Briefing webinar. We have Khaled Abu Tuame from the Jerusalem, formerly the Jerusalem Post. He's going to be with us on Sunday, April 25th, talking about his life as an Arab Israeli journalist and corruption within the Palestinian Authority. So that should be interesting as well. This program has been recorded. It's on Facebook Live at Honest Reporting Canada's Facebook, and it will be on YouTube probably in the next day or so. So thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Hen, for being such an integral part of it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Robert. And thank you for the amazing work you're doing.